When I showed this one to Thordis earlier, she just went, ooh, strange noise came out of her mouth. This is...
I love that.
This is a rhodiola. And rhodiolas are related to sedum, and they're actually high mountain plants. They're really, really hardy. They grow in full sun, but they don't like it too dry because you can see the leaves are very green. The flowers can be anything from yellow through orange, through red, really screaming red, rich dark red, and quite a few of them have flower colour changes. So as the flowers mature, they change colour.
Hello and welcome to another East Ruston Old Vicarage special on Talking Dirty, this time looking at the marvellous month of June. Over at aforementioned garden, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturist, looking, oh, so orange in his stripes.
Well, orange in your honour, because it is your favourite colour. Over in Cambridgeshire, ladies and gentlemen, we have Thordis Sophia Maria Fredriksson, who is beaming away and looking absolutely wonderful on this bright and sunny day, which is lovely because we've had rain again, have we not?
Oh, yes, lots of rain. Lots of rain when we're recording this. I was just chuckling to myself because we're 120, 30 episodes into this podcast and my middle names can still come in any order. I love that.
Well, I jumble it up just to see, just to test you, really.
To test.
I don't at all. Is it Maria Sophia or Sophia Maria?
Well, who knows anymore? Even I'm a bit shaky on that.
It's very sophisticated anyway.
We realised putting this podcast together that we haven't really had a chance to talk about Chelsea. Now, I'll put my hands up and say, in honesty, I feel like Chelsea was more of a blur than usual. We coalesced at Liverpool Street.
Can I just ask you something that wouldn't have anything to do with a certain glass of champagne, would it?
Maybe. He dashed over to Chelsea and we blitzed it. We ran around. Alan is somebody who, if you go to Chelsea, you need to be there for a long time because he gets stopped every third step by somebody else who knows him, who wants to talk about the garden. So your progress is slow. And then we stopped by the Alatex greenhouse stand for quite some time. Had a lovely conversation with Olivia Harrison. I didn't even know who she was until I Googled her later and realised she was George Harrison's widow. And her son, Danny, their son, Danny, complimented my shoes, which was very exciting. But while we were there so long, they offered me a drink. I stupidly, it's Chelsea. What was I thinking? I imagined it would be non-alcoholic. It was the largest glass of champagne I've ever had. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't drunk anything. It was sunny and hot. And let's just say, even though I tried to be slow in my sipping, that it went a little to my head. So I think the second half of my Chelsea experience, I was rather giddy or giddier.
Well, I'll just say one thing. You are always ebullient. After that size glass of champagne, you could double that or even triple it.
So it was a bit of a blur for various reasons. So I don't know if a Chelsea special is really on the cards. But Alan, what were your highlights?
Oh, I think my highlights were, it's strange. There's some of those little stands in the tent, that Derry Watkins was my highlight. She's so over the top. Derry Watkins of Special Plants down near Bath. She's so over the top, and this screeching voice across the marquee.
One of my absolute favourite things about Chelsea was my hug with Derry, because she is the best hugger, the best cuddler. We had this massively enthusiastic hug, and it was really one of my top moments.
Well, I was very pleased to see that she had got my favourite nasturtiums on her stand, and I've long grown them. Alas, I have now run out of Hermine Grashoff. Now, Hermine Grashoff, well, let's start with the nasturtiums themselves. These are double-flowered forms, and that means that they are sterile and they don't set seed. So the only way of propagating them is vegetatively, in other words, from cuttings. And I always do cuttings in the autumn. Somehow or other, I missed Hermine Grashoff. Hermine Grashoff is the bright red one. The slightly paler one, which is more Thordis's colour, kind of sunset orange, is called Margaret Long. And Derry had them both on her stand, and she had them both labelled as Hermine Grashoff, the orange and the red. And I said, there's an assertion. She said, I've named them wrong, haven't I? And I think me saying what I said, she suddenly realised what the mistake that she'd made, because she knew that it was Margaret Long, the paler one, and she knew that Hermine Grashoff was the bright scarlet one. Anyway, so we sorted that out. So that was wonderful. And I ordered some Margaret Long from Derry. She sent out young plants. They arrived very quickly, and they're good condition. I potted them up. Probably they arrived a month ago, and I've now got stocky little plants with flower buds on them, and they're really good. But she sent me one Hermine Grashoff because she'd managed to find one. I ordered 10, you see, and she said, "No, I'm sold out. Can't do it." Anyway, she found one from somewhere, so she gifted it to me, and I was very pleased to have it again. So I'm now the proud possessor of a Hermione once again.
Oh, lovely. I'm just looking through the photos of Derry's
And I'll
stand.
tell you one wonderful thing about those two nasturtiums is the fact if you use them around the edge of a container, a tall container if possible, they will flop over the edge and they'll make a cascade of colour. I remember seeing this at Powys Castle in Wales. And the gardener there had used them in niches. It got urns in niches in the wall, and tumbling out of with these wonderful sort of displays of double nasturtiums. And I'd never seen them before. I had to get them, and I have
I
had them ever
remember.
since.
Isn't it funny with some plants, you really remember that first time of seeing them? Because
Yeah,
I was a very new gardener. I'd only very recently kind of got into gardening, and then I took over the radio show in Norfolk, and we were working together. And I used to go out and record as many National Garden Scheme openings as I could,
yeah,
often sort of in my free time to try and get them on air. And I remember going to a little garden in Norwich, a little town garden, and seeing in a hanging basket cascading over Hermine Grashoff and being absolutely wowed by it and being sent home with, like a little cutting to take them.
yeah.
I'm sadly, it's long gone in the mists of time, but it really made this massive lasting impression on me. And I've always been a nasturtium lover, so I suppose it's no surprise.
Well, as I said, they're easy from cuttings, but the other thing is they're even easier from cuttings is because if you take a shoot and you put it in a little jar of water and put it somewhere it's not in burning sunshine all the time, in a couple of weeks it will have produced roots. And the same goes with busy Lizzie. So if you have a particular nasturtium, if you sow a packet of seeds, sometimes mixed colours, you'll get one that stands out for you that you particularly love. Well, you can propagate that from taking cuttings, so you get just that one.
Yeah. I didn't do that last year with my peach nasturtium for anyone who wondered, my just standard Tropaeolum. I've got some seedlings turning up at the allotment, so I'm hoping one of them will maybe be something I'm interested in, and maybe this year I will take cuttings. To go back to Derry's stand, the floral pavilion at Chelsea is just full of wonders, everywhere you look. And yet somehow we were both drawn like moths to a flame to Derry's quite small, table of plants. It was so obviously Derry. It was so obviously special plants, very special plants.
Yeah.
And then you poured over it. We both looked at it for ages. I love this little Anthyllis vulneraria, dark red, she had it labelled as, a sort of almost like a cloverish flower, like an exploding cloverish flower with these dark red ends to, I can't describe it adequately. You'll have to, we'll try and put a photo on the screen.
It's the kind of plant that most people would have walked past all this. And I think it's only, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way in any way whatsoever, but I think it's only when you have a certain level of horticultural knowledge that you get to appreciate oddities like this. Because it is quite a little oddity, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of like a little hedgehog.
It's not going to smack you in the gob and say, "Look at me," is it?
No. It's really, really hard for me to adequately describe it. So I'm sorry on the audio version. Please go and look it up. It'll be in the plant list. On the video version, I will put my not great photo of it onto the screen so you can see. But it's that combination of the really dark purpley petals on this sort of, the calyx is all clustered together in the center like a kind of explosion. Pom-pommy thing. I love that. They had, I think she had best pink poppy on her stand.
Yeah.
I think she had Bupleurum, ranunculoides, which was lovely. And that little geranium nodosum called,
I'm waiting for that.
Fielding's Folly. Also great name, Fielding's Folly.
Yeah.
A little dark purpley geranium
But
nodosum.
that purple popped out at you, didn't it?
Really?
It was only a relatively small flower, but it pops right out at you. And imagine that surrounded by lime green foliage. It's absolutely fabulous.
So Derry, it was only a small area, and yet in many respects was like our favourite thing really from Chelsea. So thank you, Derry, very much. If you ever happen to hear this, or someone tell Derry that we absolutely loved it. I suppose we could just message
What about
him.
the gardens in Chelsea?
Well, so I had two favourites, I suppose. The National Garden Scheme garden, which colour-wise was not really my bag, because obviously I like an explosion of colour. It was
I mean, it was
charming.
discreet.
It was discreet, it was subtle, it was magical and ethereal and very calming, which is perfect because a lot of it is being transported eventually to this Maggie Centre at Addenbrooke's Hospital. So you want something that's very soothing and restoring. Meanwhile, I thought the National Trust garden, the Octavia Hill garden, was absolutely the palette of colours that I wanted. And I think she'd combined really
That was
cleverly.
Anne-Marie Powell, wasn't it?
Yeah, sorry, Anne-Marie Powell had combined lots of peaches and oranges. You can see why I liked it. Lots of different tones. It was a bit like a Dulux colour chart of all of those orangey, peachy shades that I like. And then baptisias and purples and things popping through it. I thought it was a wonderful tapestry of colour.
It was. The combinations were good. There was one thing I didn't like, and it's nothing to do with flowers at all, or the plants. It was to do with those two big blocky sort of seedy things. I don't know what they were. I just thought that they rather took away the magic from the garden itself. But I agree with you. It was Anne-Marie Powell who used colour, and lots of other people I think had chosen not to. And I was talking to Ian Roof this morning, and he went to Chelsea on the last day, and he said how underwhelming it was. And also Dan Cooper, who does those wonderful garden tools and aprons and tea towels, all those wonderful things that you can't get anywhere else. His designs are better and always slightly different from anybody else's, I feel anyway. Both of them were slightly underwhelmed by the content and the gardens at Chelsea Flower Show. And Ian said to me this morning, I went and looked at each of them twice. I loved the National Garden Scheme, Tom Stuart Smith, who we had a rather funny conversation, and he said there's this lovely little building designed by his son, who's an architect, at the back of this stand, which is wonderful if you've got one of these, because if you look inside, you can bet your bottom dollar there's a bottle of champagne in there, and there's some rather smart glasses for the nice people that go and see the stand. You and I got invited on because you were talking to him about the radio and everything else, and then we went off on a conversation, and he said that this lovely building, I don't know whether it's a shed or whether it's a house. I said, we'll call it a house then. It
Created a new thing.
It was like a man cave, a lovely man cave. That's all I think. I thought I love that. My little refuge, get away and be quiet from everybody. But the planting, as you say, was very muted and very calming, as it's supposed to be, because it's going to Maggie's Centre, Addenbrooke's Hospital. But I looked at it and I thought, this is everything about this garden. I said it to him. I said everything about this garden is simple. Anyone can do it. You've used ordinary flowers. You've got ordinary plants. The outstanding plants in it were the hazels, of course, which had been crown lifted so that you saw through the stems. Immediately gave me an idea to come home and crown lift some of mine and do a similar sort of woodland planting underneath. And whereby Tom had used these fabulous big bushes of azaleas. And they were big. They were about a metre and a bit tall and wide, and big, sort of expansive things, and this lovely sort of white with a bit of lemon in them and yellow in them and all the rest of it, which is fine for Chelsea week. But after Chelsea is finished, so have the rhododendrons or azaleas. And then for the rest of the year, what do you have? So immediately, I'm thinking to myself, well, white hydrangeas, because in that lovely shady atmosphere, white hydrangeas would glow. They'd stand out. And I was thinking 1 or 2 other plants I could put them. I wanted the hydrangea to be Madame Emile Mouillère, because she produces flowers on her new wood as well as the old, so can consequently flowers for a long time. And in that lovely shade, if she's moist enough, her flowers fade to lime green, which is lovely, which is so smart, my dear, And other plants, I thought, there's a shade lover that I don't think people use enough, and it's a spiky plant. It comes from New Zealand, and it's Astelia chathamica. And I suppose it comes from the Chatham Islands, I suppose, which is virtually always in shade or sea mist, same as the Chatham Island forget-me-not. I've got it growing in the garden here. It grows in shade. It's a spiky plant. It makes a decent-sized plant up to about 1 metre tall, but, spikiness is something you don't see often in shade.
Yeah.
So when we would combine it with everything else, like, depending on how wild you like your garden, but cow parsley, which Tom said was his favourite plant in the whole garden, it's very romantic, lovely to look at, but, you rip it out once it's finished because it's done its stuff. Then there's the white foxgloves. Well, we can all do white foxgloves, and so on and so forth. it was a lovely combination. And I think the great thing about gardeners going to Chelsea and being inspired by the garden of another garden designer is that if you actually take their design and work on it, you refine it and you make it yours. I mean, the initial idea came from Tom Stewart Smith, but Ireland Gray has put his stamp on it, you know.
And I can't wait to see. I'm just looking back at my pictures of the garden, and there's all these, euphorbias, and then the odd pop of a lovely lilac geranium. I didn't check the plant list to know exactly which one. Oh, I know what my favourite plant in his garden was. It was the Melica, however you want to say it, the little grass.
Oh, the little grass, yeah.
Uniflora
That was
alba.
used. That was used quite a lot.
It's a marvelous thing because it made me realize that I just need much more of it because I have such a small patch. And actually, when I saw it at Beth Chatto's garden, which is where I really fell in love with it, there's a lot of it in the shade, and it has these like little grains of rice. So it's very magical, just like all of these little dots of white bubbling up at the feet of the plants that it surrounds.
Exactly.
It's just a marvelous.
Well,
marvelous plant.
if anybody wants to plant it, and several gardens at Chelsea did use it, and it lends itself to being a front of border plant in shade, which is where we saw it used most of all. I mean, a little tip is if you buy 3 plants of it from a decent nursery, and you take it home and you split it very carefully, you probably end up with 30, and you can make your own drifts. And do remember to keep it when you divide it. Grasses don't like being divided in the autumn. They like being divided when they've got a growing season in front of them. Keep it in the shade, water it, don't let it dry out. You'll have acres of it. Guess what I'm intending to do?
Yeah, that's what we all want. And just before this is supposed to be an East Ruston special, and it has turned into a bit of a Chelsea special. I forgot how much we could talk about something, even if it was a champagne-fueled blur for me. Baptisias, to go back to Anne-Marie Powell, I think we asked, because it wasn't easy to tell what Baptisia it was, and they said Burgundy Blast, I think. So if you were interested in knowing which the Baptisia was, I think that was the one she used.
Well, it's worth investigating baptisias because, they used to have the usual yellow sort of type lupin flowers, occasionally blue, but there's been an awful lot of breeding done, I think probably in America, with baptisias, and they're now come in a range of colours, and they're quite nice, sludgy colours.
Yeah,
they're not Thordis colours, but they're quite sludgy. But they're next to an orange geum.
Exactly. They are the foil for the Thordis colours. So I'm very into baptisias. Now, you've already touched there on how Chelsea links into East Ruston Old Vicarage, because, of course, the whole point of the flower show is to inspire our gardens. And with 32 acres, you have more space than many of us to put some of those ideas into practice. And, of course, you already had these hazels that you were thinking of maybe getting rid of, but now they've got a new lease of life thanks to Tom Stewart Smith.
Well, no, I wasn't thinking of getting rid of them. I grow these hazels for a specific purpose. And the specific purpose is not for their hazelnuts, because the squirrels pinch them all, and I never get to have any of those. The only thing I get to find is a few little nut bushes appearing where they buried them and forgotten where they are. But no, I grow them for the purpose of we coppice them. So we take them down to ground level at, after 4 or 5 years, something like that. And we use the tall stems either as bean poles, for runner beans or sweet peas, or we make frames out of them by putting in some uprights and then tying the rods to them. They're very rustic looking. They look nice. That's the whole point of it. It's not metal. It's not plastic. And we use that by putting a mesh or something over the greens to deter the pigeons, because they are a pest.
Yeah.
And don't forget black cotton, by the way, black cotton and a few sticks, because pigeons, when they go to attack something, they don't land on it. They land away from it and they walk into it. So as they're strutting away and walking in, they get pushed against their chest by a piece of cotton. They'll try somewhere else. It works.
Great tip. Yeah, great tip. So you've taken inspiration from Chelsea for your garden, which I can only imagine, having not been, for this June 2024, is absolutely exploding now. I mean, it's a marvelous time of year in the garden. And I'm assuming, my roses have had a great year. I'm assuming yours are just, blooming marvelous.
They are blooming marvelous in actual fact. And it occurred to me the other day, because we've had quite an awful lot of rain. And, the first of the shrub roses were blooming away like anything. And then we get all this horrible wind and rain, and the blooms get spoiled, the open blooms get spoiled. And it suddenly occurred to me how quickly they recover. I've got a lovely pink David Austin rose. I don't know the name of it, but it's growing outside my kitchen window, in my kitchen courtyard. And it's bright, shocking pink. It's lovely. And because the flowers were looking very sad and drab and like grotty old handkerchiefs the other day. And then, and then 2 days later, a little bit of sunshine, the next buds open up, and you forget what's happened, really. And it is absolutely glorious. But it's what occurs to me there is the earliness of roses this year. I've got two particular roses. One is the rose that was planted, I think, when the house was built here in about 1913, because in 1910, I think it was, the American pillar rose. It was a new sensational rose. It was shocking pink flowers with a little white eye, and it climbed and rambled and all the rest of it. I got it growing up a holly tree in my courtyard, and the flowers that tumble out the top of the holly tree, they look absolutely lovely, and they are open now. They don't normally open until July. I've also got it's growing on the north side of a tall wall, and there is a little seedling on the ground, a self-sown seedling of a rose, and I let it grow up, and it now comes over the wall, and it opens again in July, but it's flowering now, and it has big bunches of little cup-shaped white flowers, semi-double white flowers. It smells divine, and it's only. I tell you what, I think it's really slightly untidy gardeners like me, and I have to admit to being slightly untidy, who will let a rose seedling develop, knowing that if they dislike it, it's going to be a hell of a job to get rid of it because it will be a certain size. But if you let these roses go, within 5 years, they'll be at the top of a 20-foot tall tree and cascading out of it, looking absolutely fabulous. And for the rest of the year, you don't see them, unless, of course, you're lucky enough to have bountiful hips in the autumn, when you get a second display of all these lovely coral-coloured hips.
Yeah, I mean, roses at this time of year, that we often talk about, particularly if they are a type that comes to black spot and whatever, they're not necessarily an all year round stunner. But when it gets to now, and as particularly out walking the dog or walking with a baby, and you can stop and smell them all. Stop and smell the roses.
Yeah,
I do.
Stop and smell the roses. Absolutely. Give yourself time.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And actually, I mean, I've got, because my garden's very neglected, I have got quite a lot of black spot, but it hasn't detracted from my enjoyment of them. And do you know, I put in a rose called Jubilee Celebration because my mum has one, and it was never as nice as hers. But it appears that in the last 4 years or whatever, it's gradually maturing into looking more like hers. I don't know why. It's like as the rose gets older, the flowers get more beautiful. And I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm enjoying it anyway.
I remember a little tip from David Austin, who was the famous David Austin, Bunny Guinness's uncle. And he said, if you want to make a rose hedge by all means, but give it 3 years before it actually stands up and looks as it should do. In other words, a formative rose bush, you planted a bare root rose, you've got these few little twigs, and it needs time to get a framework, to get established.
So Rose is looking beautiful at East Ruston Old Vicarage, and I'm sure alongside them, a beautiful bedfellow. How many wonderful clematises have you got wowing the crowds?
Well, clematis are strange. I mean, the early flowering clematis for me, I find them difficult. And the reason I find them difficult is because the pruning regime is that you just trim away and tidy as necessary. I think it's those 3 words, tidy as necessary. And I think probably when you have people working for you, they get snipped and pulled out and all the rest of it. But to suddenly come upon this along the front of the house is a lovely bright red big flowered clematis, and it's just looking absolutely fantastic. Clematis I've got growing on obelisks look absolutely lovely at the moment, as do honeysuckles. I have to say, we've got quite a number of different honeysuckles. One I want to get is called, well, I'm not going to tell you what it is because everybody will be buying it, and I can't find it at the moment. But it's a red flowered honeysuckle, which unusually for a red flowered honeysuckle purports to be scented. We'll see whether it is or not. But honeysuckles are lovely. I've got the early Dutch, of course, which starts flowering in May, end of April, beginning of May, and then we go through the season with various others. One of the best, I think, is Graham Stewart Thomas. Graham Stewart Thomas opens white, and then when it's pollinated overnight, the flowers turn lemon. Lovely scent with it and everything else. And that's complemented at the moment by phyllictrums, of course. If you go through a list of plants and you look at them and you think all of the ones that are looking good in May and June, there's a heck of a lot of plants. But people often feel that, after the spring flowers come, there's this gap. They call it the June gap before, the herbaceous things get underway, which I suppose is largely true. But thalictrums, they fill that, as do aquiliges or grannis bonnets. Bearded iris, of course. I mean, they're good for a month, April, May, probably into June. If you're buying a bearded iris, I would urge you to look at the group called remontant. And remontant means that they flower again. They flower later in the year as well. And so you get into September into October, if the weather remains open, you get this lovely second display of bearded iris. New foliage on a plant that never flowers is looking absolutely stunning in the garden at the moment. And this is a plant that's completely out of context because it is a tree. It's called Cedrus atlantica glauca. It's a fir tree. And it's glauca because it's got glaucous leaves, but it has these lovely pendulous growth. And so what we tend to do with ours, we've got a couple and they're trained on a wall. So they're tied back to the wall. And at this time of the year, I'm looking at it out of the office now, you get these lovely pendulous growths hanging down. And then a little bit later on, say in July, you can tie those growths in. Don't leave it any later because they will set. And that means they will firm up and go too hard. And then when you pull them up, they'll snap and break. So you've got to do, while the shoots are still bendy, you've got to tie them in and you fill the gaps. And that is looking wonderful. It's an idea I pinched from York Gate. But whereby in York Gate, they run theirs along a low wall and they trim it like a big sausage. I don't trim mine. I just want mine to be a cascading waterfall. And there you see again, it's another way of being influenced by one garden to another gardener. And I put my stamp on it and do it a different way slightly.
And York Gate is a garden. I mean, we've talked to Ben Preston when he was head gardener there, of course, more recently from his own nursery, Cliffbank, just up the road from York Gate. Of course, Jack Ogg has been on the podcast as well. I mean, if you haven't been to York Gate Garden, you must go. Certain plants stood out to me, and too many really to possibly mention, but the Rhododendron Daviesii, which I know Brian Ellis, who's been on this podcast, of course, has, and you have. Oh, I just must have that one day. But I think it is quite tender.
We see if Brian can grow it, then he's much further inland than I am because he lives at Brook. I mean, if he can grow it, anyone can have a try. But I would advise people to put it on a north-facing wall if they can, to give it a modicum of shelter. Mine's growing on a north-facing wall anyway. And it is this most wonderful thing. I mean, it's an evergreen plant. It comes from Chile. It was introduced by Mr. Hooker, hence the name Hookerianum. And it covers itself in early spring with these lovely little red lantern-like bells. And it is, when I say cover, I mean it's covered. And it's a sight for sore eyes, as my granny used to say. I've got three varieties of it now. I've got Ada Hoffmann, who has pink flowers, pale pink flowers. She's finished. And I've got the white version that I discovered just outside the office window here, which is looking wonderful as well. But that's only a small plant, but exactly the same. So we've got red, white, and pink. So it is lovely. I mean, but you need a slightly acid soil or neutral soil to grow it well. It doesn't like alkaline soil, so that rules an awful lot of people out. And, it's just one of those plants that, you see, it has this marvelous big flush of flower, and then it has flowers intermittently right the way through until the autumn. Not huge numbers, but enough for people to stop and look, oh, what's that? It's that kind of plant. It kind of stops you in your tracks a little bit, even with few flowers on it. Lovely.
It definitely is a stop you in your tracks plant, for sure. Stayed with me ever after. Of course, you have many different ones. Of course, he does. So going back to the wonders of East Ruston Old Vicarage, what have you been up to? What have you been busy doing aside from admiring all these wonderful plants?
Well, I'm rather later this year than normal, but I've been doing my container planting. We've got the main ingredients in the standard Solanum rantinetii, the standard Brugmansias, and butylons, various other things that I use as centerpieces for these pots. So I've been actually very lucky because a man grows things for me now. So that I tell him how many of this I want and how many that I want. Of course, I always exaggerate the numbers and I end up with far too much. But it allows me to go up to the compound where they're stored and pick this to go with that, to go with that, to go with that. And then I get back to the pot itself and I'm arranging everything. And I think, oh, what it needs is a dash of brown. Off I go again to find that dash of brown. That's the kind of thing that I've been doing. It's lovely. I pack my plants in as close as possible. Everybody says that you plant far too closely, but the good thing about that is it looks right from the very beginning, and then just gets better. And don't forget, we water our containers 3 times a week, and at each watering we feed at half strength. So those plants won't go short of nutrients. They're getting nutrients all the time, albeit at half the recommended strength. But then it's continuous, and it just keeps the plants growing. They don't get fed every fortnight, as they tell you on the tin, which is rubbish, because, you get a spurt of growth, and then, well, where's the next lot coming from? Yeah, so I don't have one, but there we are. I mean, the other thing that occurred to me when I was going through some of my plants is that I pick out a tray, so 12 plants in small pots, all the same, and something in the middle, some of them in the middle, perhaps they're not as robust and as strong as the others. Well, I don't throw those away, which is a lot of people probably would. What I do is I take them out, I cut them back by at least half, maybe even more. I'm thinking of plants like Garganthemums and heliotrope at the moment. And I pot them into a bigger pot, stand them outside in a nice sheltered area, give them a water, and within a month, they're a lovely, comely, bushy little plant again, and I can use it somewhere else in the garden or give it away. You do what you like, but it's like having an heir and a spare.
And heliotropes, if for some reason you're not, putting any heliotropes in your garden this summer, they are just the most divinely scented. They're just wonderful.
Yeah, the one thing is, I think I would advise people is gardeners, if you really want to go for scent, you need to get some of the old-fashioned varieties that are vegetatively propagated, because if you don't, the modern seed strains are not as scented as the old ones are. The modern ones will have bigger flower heads, but they will be much less highly scented. So I remember some of the best highly scented ones I got from the garden, the nursery at Coton Manor, which is in Northamptonshire. Susie Pashley Tyler, and Ian there, they have the most wonderful range of plants, and they have plants on their nursery that you don't see everywhere else. So that's a little tip. Make a trip.
Yes, and see her use of colour and get inspired like we were.
And she's got a very good book on the use of colour as well. You'll be able to buy that at the nursery as well. So make an investment, make a trip, have fun, enjoy.
Before we move away from your pot planting, your container planting, you said, I need a little bit of brown. What were you using for your little bit of brown?
I knew you could ask me that. Well, there is a tiny little Lysimachia that I've got, and for a strange reason, I've lost the labels in it. Now, I don't know the name. I propagate it every year. But it's one of those plants. It has little sort of orangey yellow flowers. So forget those. It's the leaf that I want. And there is also an oxalis with yellow flowers again, with brown leaves. Don't get it confused with the ones that everybody grows it as a weed and it flings its seed around. It's not that plant, but this one makes a cascade of brown foliage. And of course, you could use 1 or 2 grasses as well. If those lovely. I can't remember the one that looks like a brown wig that's fallen off.
Oh, I know.
Head.
Yes, I can't remember its name, but yes.
But those, I mean, they lend themselves to being used at the edges of containers. And if you use them for the summer, then don't throw them away. Just put them into a pot for the winter and use them either again in a container next year or put them in the garden.
Absolutely. Well, you've given me a lot of FLOMO here, Al, and a lot of ideas, and also maybe just very sad that I haven't been to East Ruston Old Vicarage this month. Maybe someday soon. When we trek all the way across from Cambridge to the 1 mile from the sea on the Norfolk coast. This does bring us round to FLOMO, that fear of missing out you get about a flower or a plant. I did come away from Chelsea with a lot of it, particularly as I mentioned that wonderful little curiosity that was on Derry Watkins' stand. But more recently, in a much more mundane way, on every level really, I went to a local garden centre to meet up with a friend. One of those perfect situations where we needed somewhere that was child-friendly, dog-friendly, had plants, had cake, tick, 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 tick. So we met up having not seen each other for a while. The child toddled about, the dog smelt every single plant stand and everywhere all the other dogs had been. So you had a marvellous time sniffing. And quite unexpectedly, I saw a plant that really, really caught my attention. And it was actually a Senecio. So it's basically a ragwort, but it was Senecio polyodon. And it had these profuse, bright purple, pinky purple little daisies. And they were, because obviously it was a whole tray of these little sort of 9-centimetre pots or whatever, they were just dancing away, all these bright pops of colour. And I thought, that would look fantastic in my front garden. Anyway, I had nowhere to put it, so I didn't buy it, but I urged my friend to buy 3 of them. So she's taken it back to her sunny garden to plant. I don't know if it's going to seed profusely. I was trying to Google this for her, thinking, oh no, it's a ragwort. Maybe it's going to become an absolute
No, it
nightmare
won't.
seeding
No, it won't.
incontinently, but I wouldn't mind
Well,
if it did.
it's a plant that Derry Watkins sells, and I think she sells seed of it. But I know that she occasionally has young plants of it as well. So if anybody finds it difficult I mean, I don't know where your garden centre is, but this is not a usual garden centre plant. It's quite a rarity in actual fact. So it's definitely a plants person's plant. So well done. Well, you are showing remarkably good taste, Ms. Fredrickson.
For me.
No.
You know, it's funny. I was saying to her when we met up at this garden centre that I live betwixt two garden centres. Obviously, I have nurseries like Monksilver nearby as well. But I say you go to this particular other garden centre if you want to buy gifts, not plants. And the one we went to is the garden centre I go to if I want to buy plants. And they do have just a rather above average level of plants that come in. They buy in, I think, rather than grow, a lot of them. But things like Coleus, Southern Stemon, they have a nicer selection than other garden centres. Just some garden centres, they're obviously plants people running them, and they just have a different taste to what your bog standard garden centre will have.
You know what often happens, and I mean, I don't know whether many people are aware of this, but quite often, if you as a gardener are growing a plant, and you know you grow well, and you will know whether you grow it well or not, and you've got 10 or 12 plants, take them along to the local garden centre and say, look, would you like to buy these from me? Make me an offer. And do bear in mind that, it's not going to be retail price because they've got to make a profit on what they buy. But, that's how an awful lot of these places have these very interesting plants that perhaps nobody else has. And it is hobby growers, and which you often find at plant fairs and the like. So, it's always worth, if you've got an excess of something that's fairly rare, take it along to your local garden centre and say, would you like to buy these, or can I swap them for something?
Or become one of these marvellous people who sets up fabulous plant stalls at the end of their garden, right by the gate.
Do worse than that, yeah.
People like Richard Hobbs. I was so jealous I didn't live near Richard Hobbs, who, has been on this podcast.
You'd be broke if you did.
That's true. But during COVID in particular, during lockdown, anyone who lived near him could just pop along and put a few pennies in and buy the most extraordinary treasures. Oh, they were so lucky. Yeah, maybe a few pounds. Mind you, his plants are always very reasonably priced. So anyway, that was my Flomo, a kind of ragwort. It's very apt for me, really. What would you like to bring to the Flomo party, Mr. Gray?
Well, something that's impossible for me to grow, really, because it follows on from a conversation that we had, you and I had a few days ago, and you suddenly reminded me of the beauty of the blue poppy Mecanopsis. And I haven't had it for a very long time, and I do know that I possibly can buy it wholesale, any young plant can buy it wholesale. And I just have to sort of try and do what you did, and that is to stop it flowering in its first year, to increase its perennialness. We're all so greedy. We want the flowers, and then you never see the plant again because it dies. But if you can get it to build up a big enough crown, and the reason I'm going to try that again is because this year, since the end of last year, we've had an inordinate amount of rain, and moisture is what this poppy loves. It also loves coolth, Coolth, and we've got plenty of that as well. I mean, today what's it say on the computer? Hold on, it's 14 degrees outside. That is not very warm, but this is what that kind of poppy likes. So I'm going to have another growing Mecanopsis, and we'll see how we go. And I hope I'm not going to be like you and get the white one.
Oh, well.
When I've waited 2 years for it to flower.
If anyone heard this on the radio, that was my great sorrow. Fall in love with the blue poppy, buy one, deadhead, chop it off before it even flowers to give it time to bulk up, wait an entire year, and then it comes out white. Oh, the disappointment. If you do want to listen to us on the radio, by the way, plug of the week, but you can find the links to it on my Instagram. So I do a Saturday show where there's no gardening, it's just music and fun. But on Sundays from 11 till 1, Alan and various East Anglian gardening gurus come and join us and answer people's questions. So you never know what you're going to talk about. It goes all over the place. We get sidetracked into different planty topics along the way. And it's just a lot of fun. And you don't have to be remotely local to listen to it. You can catch it on BBC Sounds. You can listen to it abroad, I reckon. So, and obviously not live on a Sunday, it's available all the time. So then you can fast forward all the music.
We've had people ringing in from the continent, haven't we?
Yeah. We have one very dedicated listener in Nuremberg. Hello, if you're watching. So yes, please do come along and join the fun. And you can just listen online wherever and whenever you want. For the time
and just remember, No question is ever too silly, because we've all had to ask these questions at the beginning of our gardening lives and all the rest of it. So just remember, don't feel silly, but you may be asking the very question that 100 other people want to know the answer to, and they dare not say it.
Some of us are still asking the silly questions all these years into our gardening journey, and probably will keep asking them for some time. In the background, I can see a child who's run off with the Talking Dirty notebook. He's probably about to shred it into a million pieces. So I'm going to go and try and rescue that before bad things happen. Thank you very much for joining us for what has been a kind of hybrid East Ruston Old Vicarage and Chelsea special. I hope you got something out of it. I certainly did. I've had a lovely time. Thank you very much, Mr. Gray. Until next time, happy gardening.
Bye-bye. Happy gardening, everybody. I thought we'd divorce. I couldn't get through to you.
You'd be very nice in your stripes, though.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I don't know about that.
Right then.
Come on, honey. Do you know the 2 words, 3 words? Tits and teeth.
Ah!
And so that one stalk supports the other, as it were.
Because you said 10th or the 11th. Hold on.
Little hubbub in the background.
Sorry.
Well, I was very impressed that you managed to carry on until that point. You were just in the zone. You were like, I've gone full broadcasting mode. I'm talking through it.
On some obelisk, have you frozen, Shortis? You have. Oh, no, you haven't.
Just wrapped. And enjoy it. And I've just absolutely had a brain fade on that wonderful tree they have.
A Crinodendron hookerianum.
Crinodendron. There we go. Crinodendron. That completely gone. It wasn't even tip of the tongue. It was just completely gone.